There are ideas that enlighten, and there are ideas that burn. Machiavelli belongs to the second kind. He didn't write to please or to preach Christian virtues or utopian ideals. He wrote for those who live in the real world, where power is dirty, morality is shaky, and the game is played with cold blood. In The Prince, Machiavelli tears down the foundations of traditional political philosophy. He rips off the veil of hypocrisy and exposes what few dare to admit: that ruling often requires betrayal, manipulation, deception, even killing. Not for pleasure, but out of necessity. His goal was never to justify evil, but to understand the machinery that builds empires and maintains order among people driven by ambition, fear, and treachery. That's why Machiavelli's ideas have been called diabolical, immoral, even forbidden. But maybe what scares us the most isn't the cruelty, it's the clarity. He forces us to let go of moral comfort and see what most would rather ignore. Power is not held by good intentions. This video brings together 25 of Machiavelli's most brutal, direct, and dangerously true ideas about power and manipulation. They're not here to ask for your agreement, only your understanding, because those who understand survive, and those who survive rule. Get ready to step into a world where virtue is a mask, fear is a tool, and reality doesn't apologize. This isn't a guide to be good. It's a map to avoid being devoured. This is probably the most feared, and at the same time most misunderstood, idea associated with Niccolò Machiavelli. Saying the ends justify the means sounds, at first glance, like an invitation to cynicism, cruelty, and immorality. But is that really all there is to it? Or is there a deeper layer, something more strategic, maybe even more honest than the moral hypocrisy we often see in political discourse? Writing during the chaotic political landscape of Renaissance Italy, Machiavelli didn't have time for fragile idealism. He witnessed cities at war, princes being assassinated, alliances falling apart overnight. In that chaos, the real question wasn't, is this good or evil? But, does this work or not? That's where his idea gains strength. What he's really saying is this: a ruler who wants to keep a state united, ensure people's safety, and protect sovereignty must sometimes do what's necessary, even if it clashes with traditional moral codes. Political stability, for him, is such a high value that it can justify actions that, in another context, would be condemned. But that doesn't mean acting without limits. Machiavelli didn't promote evil for evil's sake. He believed in calculated action, using evil only when it's effective, swift, and final, to avoid greater collapse like civil war, foreign invasion, or social chaos. In this sense, there's something even tragic in his view. The leader must carry the burden of moral decision-making, so the people don't have to. And let's be honest, this idea is more present in the real world than we like to admit. Think of major political decisions that shaped history. Winston Churchill, for example, once allowed a British city to be bombed to protect secret intel from the Germans, fully aware lives would be lost, but believing it would save many more in the long run. In times of war, leaders often choose between bad and worse, not good and bad. And you? How many times in your own life have you done something uncomfortable, maybe even wrong, for a greater good? Isn't that, in some way, what Machiavelli is pointing to? That human nature is a mix of light and shadow, and that power requires navigating that ambiguity with courage and strategy. Machiavelli breaks with classical moral philosophy, like Plato or Aristotle, who imagined ideal politics built on justice, virtue, and reason. For Machiavelli, real life doesn't allow for that kind of purity. A ruler who clings too tightly to moral ideals risks being destroyed by rivals who have no such hesitation. As he famously put it, a man who wishes to act entirely virtuously soon comes to ruin among so many who are not virtuous. Brutal, yes, but also honest. That's why the ends justify the means makes people uncomfortable. It forces us to see politics as it is, not as we wish it were. It challenges us to ask if moral purity is even possible in a world where power, violence, and manipulation are part of the system. At the same time, this lesson carries a silent warning. If we accept that any end justifies any means, with no limits, no reflection, then anything becomes allowed. And when everything is allowed, power stops being a tool and becomes tyranny. So what Machiavelli really offers isn't a blank check for cruelty, but a pragmatic philosophy of political action. What matters to him is the outcome: preserving the state, maintaining order, securing legitimate authority. If that requires cleverness, firmness, and at times, ruthlessness, so be it. But be careful. This is a lesson that demands maturity. It only works when paired with virtù, a core concept in Machiavelli's work. Not virtue in the Christian sense, but the ability to act wisely, decisively, and adapt to circumstances. A leader who uses brutality without wisdom, without control, without purpose, that's not Machiavellian. That's just cruel. So here's a challenge. In today's world, obsessed with appearances of kindness and polished speeches, maybe we actually need a bit more Machiavelli. Not to become colder or more manipulative, but to face reality with more clarity. If you want to lead a country, a company, or even your own life, you need to understand this. You won't always. Please everyone, you won't always be able to make popular decisions and still be effective. Sometimes, the right path won't be the prettiest one. And when that moment comes, the question will be, do you have the courage to do what's necessary? Now tell me, in the comments, do you think the ends justify the means? Or do you believe there are lines that should never be crossed? Even if that means failing, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more ideas that challenge everything you thought you knew about power, ethics, and leadership. Because when we talk about using hard methods for greater goals, we're not just talking about action, we're talking about people. After all, to govern is to deal with people, and that leads us to another unavoidable choice for those in power. Is it better to be loved or feared? Machiavelli's answer might surprise you or make you uncomfortable, but it makes sense. In a world where loyalty fades, love is unstable, and fear might be the last barrier between order and collapse. This is, without a doubt, one of Machiavelli's most unsettling ideas. It shocks, challenges our moral instincts, and forces us to confront a tough question. When you're in charge, what really keeps people loyal and obedient? Affection or fear? Machiavelli answers without hesitation. It's better to be feared than loved if you can't be both. And the reason is simple. Love is fragile, inconsistent, and depends on the other person's willingness to reciprocate. But fear is steady, predictable, and doesn't require gratitude, just respect and clear boundaries. But let's be clear, Machiavelli isn't saying a leader should be cruel or tyrannical. It's not about spreading terror, but about ensuring power is respected. Fear, in this case, is a tool to preserve order, authority, and stability. It creates a type of respect that doesn't waver with public opinion or the mood of the crowd. Think about it. People love those who treat them well, who give them what they want. But that love can disappear the moment a leader has to make unpopular decisions. Raising taxes, cutting benefits, taking tough action against internal threats. The same people cheering today could turn against you tomorrow, or worse. Fear, on the other hand, sets clear limits. When used wisely, it prevents chaos. It protects the leader from betrayal, rebellion, and power games behind the scenes. Fear commands respect, even when love fades away. And that's the point. Fear is a more reliable foundation than affection. Machiavelli wasn't alone in this thinking. Centuries later, Hobbes would argue that without a higher power to enforce order, people would live in constant conflict, every man for himself. For power to be legitimate and lasting, it has to contain humanity's unstable nature. Still, this doesn't mean ruling with terror. Machiavelli warns, Fear should never turn into hatred. A hated leader is doomed because hatred drives people to act against you. Fear alone doesn't. That's why cruelty must be used with precision, never excessively, never for pleasure, and always with a clear political goal. You see the same thing in companies too. A leader who tries too hard to be liked often avoids conflict, fails to set boundaries, and becomes too permissive. That leads to chaos, broken authority, and a lack of direction. But a respected leader, someone who sets clear expectations and makes tough calls, may not be beloved, but they're followed. And in the end, they're the ones who hold the team together when things get rough. The point isn't choosing between kindness and cruelty. It's choosing between effectiveness and fragility. Machiavelli asks leaders to step out of emotion and into political logic. He asks, what works to keep power and preserve the state? And the hard truth is this: fear is more dependable than love. Now think about your own life. How many times were you more careful around someone who commanded respect than around someone who was just nice? How often have you respected boundaries simply because you knew there would be consequences? Fear, when well managed, isn't the enemy of peace. It's the foundation of order. This lesson hits even harder in today's world, where authority is constantly being challenged. Leaders who care too much about being liked often get swallowed up by instability. They confuse being liked with being respected, and when crisis hits, they lack the strength to hold the line. Machiavelli understood that love depends on others, but fear depends on your own ability to act. It's a strategic choice. Rely on the feelings of others or on your own firmness. Still, this choice requires emotional intelligence. It's not about becoming a tyrant. It's about understanding that real leadership can't stand on charm or kindness alone. It needs strength, presence, and yes, a healthy dose of fear. That's why Machiavelli says, men have less hesitation in offending someone who makes himself loved than someone who makes himself feared. That's human nature. When there's no fear of consequences, respect fades. When there's only love, everything depends on voluntary loyalty, and that can vanish overnight. Leadership, then, is a delicate dance between affection and authority. If you're only feared, you'll be hated. If you're only loved, you'll be weak. The key is balance. Inspire respect, stay firm, and act justly. The effective leader keeps enough distance to be respected and enough closeness to avoid being hated. Maybe that's the real art of power, drawing the line with strength without ever crossing into cruelty. Because when you cross that line, you don't build a kingdom, you build a prison, and no tyranny lasts forever. Now think about today's world. In politics, business, even social relationships, how many leaders have fallen because they tried to please everyone? And how many have stood firm because they knew when to say no, even under pressure? That's the difference between leading with love and leading with authority. And in the end, that choice defines who survives and who gets forgotten. Speaking of survival, there's something even deeper at play in this game of power. Because if fear is what holds order together, how do you build that kind of authority? How do you make people fear you without using force all the time? Machiavelli gives us the answer in his next powerful and dangerous idea. You don't have to be virtuous, you just have to appear virtuous. Because the truth is, more than being loved or feared, a leader must know how to perform. And that's where the real power lies, in the art of appearances. We live in an era where image is more important than substance. Social media, carefully rehearsed speeches, calculated smiles in front of cameras. None of this is new. Machiavelli already noticed, back in the 16th century, that the game of power is not won by those who are virtuous, but by those who seem virtuous. For him, politics is not the realm of pure morality. It's a space of perception, appearance, and symbolic manipulation. The people, he said, do not judge by internal actions, but by visible actions, by the way the ruler presents themselves. And if it's the image that shapes trust, then maintaining that appearance is more important than actually practicing traditional virtues. This is disturbing. After all, we've been taught that integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is looking. But Machiavelli warns us, in politics, what the people see matters more than what actually is. Real ethics may be silent. The appearance of ethics, on the other hand, screams. And before accusing Machiavelli of defending hypocrisy or falseness, it's important to understand the context. He lived in a divided Italy, marked by betrayals, power games, and foreign invasions. In this environment, a leader who was simply good, fair, or honest would be swallowed by the cunning and deceitful. It wasn't about betraying values out of vanity. It was about surviving politically in a brutal world. Machiavelli then proposes a radical separation between private ethics and political ethics. The ruler needs to master the art of acting. They need to appear compassionate, loyal, religious, just, even if behind the scenes they act with coldness and calculation. This is not trickery, it's a survival strategy. And if this seems too cruel, think about current leadership. How many politicians are adored for passionate speeches about justice and equality? But behind the scenes, they keep shady deals and alliances with dubious interests. How many corporate leaders preach values like transparency and empathy, but in practice, operate only for profit and influence? This doesn't mean we should accept this behavior as right, but it's a call for clarity. Machiavelli is not saying what the world should be. He's showing what the world is. And if we want to truly understand power, we need to lift the veil of appearances, while also learning to use it. The appearance of virtue is a tool, a way to keep the people united, avoid panic, and project security in times of uncertainty. The ruler who appears just inspires confidence. One who shows piety, even if selective, disarms criticism. One who seems religious wins the hearts of believers, and with that, they strengthen their position, even if their real actions are guided by a different kind of logic. Machiavelli, with brutal honesty, writes, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." It's the essence of politics, and more than that, it's a portrait of human nature itself. Most judge by appearances, depth, truth, those belong to few. But here's a warning. The appearance must be consistent. A slip-up, a contradiction, a revealed truth can ruin the whole setup. That's why the ruler must be a master of acting, a true actor. Firm, attentive, always, in control of the narrative they present to the world. And yes, this requires coldness. It requires self-control. It requires what Machiavelli called virtù, the ability to act according to the occasion, adapting to the moment with strategic intelligence. It's more than pretending. It's understanding the psychological game of power. Many condemn this view as cynical, but perhaps paradoxically, it's more sincere than the moralistic speeches that pretend purity in a dirty world. Machiavelli invites us to grow, to leave naivete behind, to realize that politics is not made for saints, but for those who know how to balance masks and decisions. And if you stop to reflect, you'll see that this doesn't only apply to great leaders. In our personal, social, and professional lives, how many times have we adopted a posture different from our true selves? How many times have we smiled when we wanted to shout? How many times have we stayed silent to maintain an image? It's not hypocrisy. It's adaptation, and what Machiavelli proposes is exactly that. Adapt to the real world, not the ideal one. He flips Platonic logic. He's not looking for the philosopher king, pure and rational, but the effective ruler, the one who understands the political theatre and knows how to perform on stage without losing control behind the scenes. The people need to believe, and belief requires symbols, gestures, speeches, all carefully designed. The leader, therefore, needs to be more than competent. They need to be persuasive. But be careful. This lesson also carries a huge risk. When appearance becomes everything, one loses touch with reality. The ruler starts living to maintain the image, forgetting the substance. And at that point, they stop being Machiavellian and become a prisoner of their own performance. That's why Machiavelli doesn't preach lying as an end in itself. He teaches how to use appearance as a tool, and like any tool, it should be used with precision. The image should serve power, not be the power itself. Now, if you thought this was deep, wait until you see the next lesson. Because if appearance is what sustains trust, then it's necessary to know when to be virtuous and when not to be. And this, perhaps, is the most unsettling of all Machiavelli's lessons. A wise leader must learn not to be good. After all, in certain moments, being too good is a risk. And this is where Machiavelli throws us into an even deeper ethical dilemma. Is it worth holding on to goodness if it costs you your own power? It takes the courage to go beyond common morality and master the art of being good or not being when necessary. There are moments in life, and especially in leadership, when being good isn't just insufficient, it's dangerous. For Machiavelli, this is one of the harshest truths of politics. A leader who insists on always being moral, fair, and kind will eventually be destroyed by those who don't play by the same rules. He doesn't say this with cynicism, but with a raw and realistic view of human nature and how power works. A man who always wants to act virtuously in every situation will come to ruin among so many who are not virtuous. That line, taken straight from the prince, isn't a green light for cruelty. It's a warning, a wake-up call for those who believe personal morality alone can uphold authority and keep a nation stable. Machiavelli understood that traditional morality, based on generosity, compassion, forgiveness, and honesty, is admirable in everyday life. But a ruler deals with something bigger. Lives, nations, borders, social stability. And sometimes, to guarantee peace, you have to draw your sword. This is where his philosophy breaks radically from both Christian and classical traditions. While Aristotle linked good politics to moral virtue, and Christianity demanded leaders be examples of humility and charity, Machiavelli throws that out. For him, a good ruler is one who knows when to abandon goodness and doesn't feel guilty about it. Let's look at a practical example. A ruler uncovers a conspiracy to overthrow him. The plotters are part of the elite, well-connected, and backed by a segment of the population. If he chooses to act out of goodness, he might forgive them and expose himself to imminent betrayal. If he's wise, he'll act decisively. He might arrest them, exile them, or eliminate them. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Machiavelli calls this necessita, the principle that justifies breaking moral norms in certain situations to preserve the greater good. A ruler shouldn't act out of a thirst for power, but out of a duty to keep the state functioning and unified. Here's one of Machiavelli's most important ideas: the difference between private morality and public morality. While citizens can, and should, live by high moral standards, rulers don't have that luxury. They're responsible for everyone, not just themselves. And that responsibility sometimes requires getting their hands dirty. This idea forces us to face an uncomfortable truth. There are times when kindness paralyzes and strategic harshness saves. A ruler who hesitates to act against criminals or traitors may doom an entire people. One who refuses to use force when necessary opens the door to collapse. Look at modern revolutions, for example. Well-intentioned leaders guided by noble ideals are often overthrown by ruthless opponents, or watch their dreams fall apart under the harsh realities of politics. In many cases, they lacked the courage to do what needed to be done. Machiavelli doesn't argue that leaders should be evil. He argues they should be effective, and to do that, they need discernment, knowing when traditional morality strengthens the state and when it weakens it. Real political wisdom is about recognizing those moments. knowing when to be kind and when to be ruthless. Of course, this must be done carefully. A ruler who abuses power or acts cruelly without reason or restraint quickly becomes hated. And as Machiavelli warned, hatred will destroy you. A true Machiavellian leader is cold, but calculated. Harsh action becomes acceptable only when the state is in real danger. Outside of that, caution must prevail. This philosophy is uncomfortable because it pulls us out of our moral comfort zone. It shows us that, in many cases, ethical purity is a dangerous luxury. In a way, Machiavelli invites us to political maturity. Stop expecting saintly leaders. Start looking for leaders who know how to protect, decide, and act, even when it damages their reputation. And this lesson goes beyond politics. In life, we've all faced hard choices. We've had to say no when our heart said yes. We've distanced ourselves from toxic people even when it hurt. We've made tough decisions to protect something bigger, our peace of mind, our integrity, our future. Maybe that's what Machiavelli is really trying to teach us. Wisdom isn't about always being good. It's about knowing the right time to be good. Kindness without intelligence becomes naivete, and naivete in power is a death sentence. And more than that, recognizing this doesn't mean throwing ethics away. It means acknowledging that the world is messy, that evil exists, that conflict is real, and facing it takes more than good intentions. It takes courage. Courage to act when everyone else hesitates. Courage to make unpopular decisions. Courage to carry the weight of a choice that might save many, but damage your own legacy. Because yes, a true leader may be misunderstood in the present, but history will remember them as someone who did what was necessary. And speaking of courage, there's a force even older, more primal, and more decisive than goodness, a force that, for Machiavelli, lies at the very heart of power, controlled violence, the ability to impose order decisively and eliminate danger before it grows. Christian morality doesn't work in politics. A new kind of ethics, strategic and political, is needed to keep the state standing. Kindness might lead a leader to ruin. Now imagine what happens when that leader tries to apply an ethic of forgiveness and humility in a world of war, betrayal, and power struggles. Machiavelli shows us that to govern, one must set aside the virtues of the altar and pick up the weapons of reason. This idea shocks a lot of people. How can Christian morality, the ethical foundation of Western civilization for centuries, not be fit for politics? Isn't it all about loving others, showing compassion, being humble, and forgiving? Yes, and that's exactly why Machiavelli questioned it. In his unsparing analysis of power, he saw that while Christian values may be noble on a personal level, they become dangerous when applied to the art of ruling. This doesn't mean Machiavelli was anti-faith or anti-religion. It simply means he drew a clear line between spirituality and leadership. For him, mixing the two was a fast track to political failure. Christian morality calls for sacrifice, renunciation, unconditional forgiveness. It treats suffering as virtue and humility as greatness. But the state doesn't run on self-denial. Power isn't maintained through passivity. A ruler must protect, decide, and act, even when that means being tough. Machiavelli noted that ancient peoples, like the Romans, followed a civic ethic rooted in strength, courage, glory, and military power. There was no room for forgiving enemies or hesitating in the face of threats. This action-based ethic, grounded in virtù, demanded that leaders put the common good above personal pity. But when Christianity rose, things changed. Political virtue was replaced by spiritual virtue. Heaven became more important than earth. The ideal ruler stopped being the wise warrior and became the humble servant. To Machiavelli, this shift weakened both the republican spirit and the authority of leaders. A Christian prince trying to be a saint loses the ability to survive in the brutal world of politics. He becomes vulnerable, manipulable, and often sacrificed. This doesn't mean Christian values are wrong. Machiavelli isn't making moral judgments. What he's doing is drawing a line between two worlds. What's good for the soul isn't always good for the state. A ruler deals with betrayal, war, manipulation, and ambition. In that arena, Christian ethics are like wearing armor made of paper. Politics runs on a different logic, a logic where decisions can't be based solely on forgiveness, but rather on protection, where excessive humility can be seen as weakness, where turning the other cheek might just get your head chopped off. Imagine a leader who refuses to punish his opponents out of moral principle. He believes in forgiveness, reconciliation, dialogue. But while he hesitates, his enemies regroup, gain strength, and eventually take him down. The result? Not only does he lose power, the people he was trying to protect are thrown into chaos. To Machiavelli, this isn't just tragic, it's irresponsible, because a ruler doesn't have the luxury of being just a good person. He is an institution, his decisions affect thousands, maybe millions. So when he chooses to be good instead of effective, he's not being virtuous, he's being weak. That's why Machiavelli calls for what some would see as a new kind of ethics, a political ethic, one that doesn't totally reject morality, but reinterprets it through the lens of effectiveness. Justice, for example, isn't about compassion. It's about maintaining order and punishing precisely. Generosity isn't about giving everything to everyone. It's about knowing when and how much to give to maintain support. Mercy isn't blind forgiveness. It's avoiding public hatred while using necessary force. This ethic isn't immoral, it's strategic. It recognizes that politics deals with human imperfection, with ego, fear, and ambition. So it demands tools that work in reality, not ideals that crumble under pressure. A leader can be inspired by high values, but cannot govern based only on them. Machiavelli wasn't alone in this thinking. Centuries later, Nietzsche would criticize Christianity for promoting a slave morality, one based on submission and resignation. In the 20th century, Carl Schmitt argued that sovereignty begins when the ruler decides to suspend moral norms in the name of order. But maybe what Machiavelli says most clearly, and what few dare to repeat, is that poorly applied goodness can do more damage than carefully measured ruthlessness. Governing is about choosing, and often those choices involve moral dilemmas with no easy answers. Punish or forgive, trust or eliminate, talk or intervene. In these moments, Christianity asks you to lower your head. Politics demands that you raise your sword. Does this mean we should throw morality out entirely? No. It means we need to see it as a tool, not an untouchable commandment. A wise leader doesn't follow dogma blindly. They act when the moment demands it, and they act with courage. And you, following this series, might be wondering, is it possible to lead without being corrupted? Without betraying your values? Machiavelli doesn't give you a comforting answer, but he gives you something better: raw truth, the awareness that power demands tough decisions, and that political ethics aren't based on purity, but on responsibility. And speaking of responsibility, you can't take it on without understanding the role of chance. Yes, virtù, strategy, and intelligence matter. But there's something else that always escapes our control: luck, fate, the unexpected. So once we understand that politics demands a different kind of ethics, more strategic than moralistic, we also begin to see that not everything is in our hands. No matter how rational, strong, or prepared a leader is, some things will always be left to chance. Yes, not every victory is earned through skill alone. Sometimes, as Machiavelli says, it's fortune, not virtue, that decides. But then, the question becomes, what can a leader truly control, and what must he learn to face? There's a silent force that always lingers behind our decisions, strategies, and intentions. A force that often separates success from failure, heroes from the fallen, empires from collapse. Machiavelli called this force fortuna, fortune, and he said it plainly. Fortune controls half of all human actions. So, what about the other half? That part belongs to virtù, a deep concept that's often misunderstood, but absolutely essential to understanding Machiavelli's view of power. And no, virtù doesn't mean virtue in the traditional moral or religious sense, not even close. For Machiavelli, virtù is skill, boldness, strategic intelligence, and above all, the ability to adapt when things go off script. He saw political life as a battlefield in constant motion, where events don't follow predictable logic. Wars break out, alliances fall apart, natural disasters hit, betrayals come out of nowhere. A leader who clings to fixed plans or rigid rules is doomed. But the one who develops virtù, that flexible, creative ability to act in chaos, that leader stands a chance. Picture Fortuna, like a raging river. When the weather is calm, it flows peacefully. But when storms hit, it floods, destroys crops, and swallows entire villages. A naive leader prays. A leader with virtù builds levees before the rain. They don't control fortune, but they prepare to face it. And that's the beauty and the harshness of this idea. Machiavelli doesn't promise a fair world. He doesn't say the good will always win or that effort always pays off. What he offers is something more grounded. Half of life is in your hands. The other half isn't. And that's exactly why you need to be ready. This idea is more relevant than ever. We live in chaotic times: global instability, economic crises, tech disruption, environmental collapse. If you live like the world is predictable, reusing old strategies, ignoring signs, relying on luck, you'll fall behind. But those with virtù, those who stay sharp, act fast and think clearly, they rise. And let's be clear, virtù takes courage, not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite fear. The courage to move when everything feels uncertain, to make the hard call no one else wants to make. It's a tragic, almost lonely kind of courage, because it only shows up when things fall apart. Machiavelli didn't romanticize heroes. He respected lucid realists, people who understood that fortune can't be tamed, but can be anticipated. Those who knew that victory is never guaranteed, but still prepared, trained, planned, acted. And what about you? Have you been relying too much on luck? Think about it. How many times have you put off an important decision, hoping things would just work out? How often did you blame bad luck, when the truth was, you weren't ready? Machiavelli would say, own your part, because chance only controls those who aren't ready to face it. Here's the raw truth. Fortune favors those with virtù, not because it eliminates risk, but because it turns chaos into opportunity. It favors those who move fast, who read the signs, who don't cling to the past. This ability to pivot when things go sideways is what separates leaders from followers. It builds statesmen and topples arrogant rulers. It's what keeps power alive, even when everything else is falling apart. And this applies far beyond politics. In business, relationships, and personal growth, we all face the same two forces: the chaos of the world and our ability to respond with virtù. If you've made it this far, it's because you're not here for feel-good quotes or empty theory. You want to understand how power really works, how to stay grounded when everything shifts, how to stop being swept away by fortune's current. So here's your invitation. Drop a comment below. How do you deal with the unexpected in your life? Do you respond with preparation or panic? With strategy or by just hoping it all works out? And of course, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to wake up to these truths no one else is saying out loud. Because, as Machiavelli puts it, the world doesn't always reward the good, but it always rewards those who are ready. And speaking of being ready, there's a golden lesson most people overlook. Even with all the virtù in the world, strategy, strength, and courage, brute force alone isn't enough. You also need cunning, because sometimes Enemies aren't defeated with open war, but with intelligence, deception, and silent calculation. Power isn't just about taking ground. It's about knowing what others are planning, reading intentions, playing behind the scenes. In the end, virtù isn't just about the sword in your hand. It's about seeing danger before it arrives, and for that, the prince must learn to act with the courage of a lion and the cleverness of a fox. Picture a lion, majestic, feared, strong enough to face any enemy head-on. Now imagine a fox, quick, quiet, clever, always alert, always calculating. Machiavelli looked at these two animals and said, "The prince must learn how to be both, a fox and a lion." This isn't just a pretty metaphor, it's a survival strategy. In the real world, brute force alone isn't enough. A ruler who tries to lead through strength only might win fear and even respect, but also builds enemies fast. And eventually, strength without wisdom becomes blindness. The lion may be powerful, but it doesn't see traps. It attacks. It charges, but it doesn't anticipate. The fox, on the other hand, knows when danger is hidden. It doesn't trust appearances. It watches, it plans, it lies when it has to, but it has no claws. And if it's caught, it's defenseless. That's why Machiavelli insists a successful leader must be both, strong enough to command respect and smart enough to avoid being played. This idea hits at the core of leadership. We're not talking about being good or bad. We're talking about tools for survival and influence. In politics, someone who's only strong becomes predictable. Someone who's only cunning becomes suspicious. But someone who balances both, nearly untouchable. And this lesson matters more than ever in a world where threats rarely come through the front door. Often, the things that destroy leaders happen behind the scenes. Silent betrayals, secret alliances, political games. The lion doesn't see those coming. The fox survives them. Machiavelli forces us to let go of the fairy tale idea of the perfect leader. He doesn't believe in ideal rulers. He believes in effective ones. And for him, effectiveness comes from strategic flexibility. When the moment calls for strength, the prince roars. When it calls for silence, the prince waits in the shadows. And this isn't just about politics. In business, for example, leaders who only use aggression burn bridges. Those who only play behind-the-scenes politics lose the team's respect. Real leadership means knowing when to stand firm and when to play smart. It's a difficult balance, and that's why it's rare. Machiavelli knew that most leaders fail because they lean too far in one direction. Some rely only on force. They crush opposition but don't notice when their allies turn on them. Others rely only on charm and diplomacy until someone more ruthless knocks them down. The real art of leadership is knowing when to be each one, when to bare your teeth and when to smile, when to stay quiet and when to strike, when to be cautious like the fox, and when to be feared like the lion. But here's the thing, that balance doesn't come from instinct. It comes from practice, from experience, from paying close attention. A Machiavellian leader isn't impulsive. They're patient. They study others like a strategist. They learn their enemies' moves. They understand the masses. They know how to read the room. And most of all, they choose their role. The prince isn't a slave to emotion. He's an actor on the stage of power. And like any good actor, he controls the script. Now stop and think, which one are you in, your daily life? Are you more like the lion, direct, bold, but sometimes too blunt or careless? Or like the fox, observant, diplomatic, but maybe hesitant when it's time to confront? Machiavelli would say you need both. Because life, just like politics, demands that kind of duality. And virtù, as we saw in the last lesson, isn't just about talent. It's about knowing how to blend strength and strategy depending on the moment. But this is more than a tactical lesson. It says something deeper about how power actually works. The ones who win aren't always the most honest. They're the most prepared, And to win, you need to read your opponent's cards and hide your own. That's the hard truth. The strongest don't always win. The smartest do. The honest don't always win. The most strategic do. And in this game, the ruler can't afford to be predictable. He has to be a mystery. Someone enemies can't quite figure out. Someone the people respect, even if they don't fully understand him. Someone who knows how to use force and when to fake weakness just to draw the enemy into a mistake. If that makes you uncomfortable, good. Machiavelli isn't here to comfort you. He's here to open your eyes. Because once you understand this truth, you don't just lead better, you live smarter. You stop being naive and start paying attention. As harsh as it sounds, there are moments when cruelty isn't just inevitable, it's necessary. Not to dominate, but to restore order. And when used at the right time, with intelligence and restraint, it can prevent wars, revenge, and long-term chaos. It might sound shocking at first, talking about cruelty as something useful. But when Machiavelli says this, he's not celebrating violence. He's being brutally honest about how power really works. To him, cruelty, when used wisely and precisely, can be a bitter medicine. But sometimes, it's the only way to prevent even greater damage. The real problem, according to Machiavelli, isn't cruelty itself, it's how it's used. When cruelty is constant, emotional, or used for revenge, it leads to hatred, rebellion, and chaos. But when it's used decisively, quickly, and with clear purpose, it can stop violence in its tracks, eliminate threats, and restore order. This is one of the most controversial, but also one of the most realistic ideas in Machiavelli's philosophy. He's not suggesting a government ruled by fear. He's suggesting a ruler who knows when a firm hand is necessary and uses it all at once, not dragged out over time. One of his favorite examples is Cesare Borgia, a powerful Italian leader. To bring stability to a troubled region, Borgia sent a ruthless official, Ramiro d'Orco, to handle things with a heavy hand. Once the people started to hate Ramiro for his cruelty, Borgia had him publicly executed. That move sent a clear message. The brutality was over, and justice would now prevail. The result: order was restored, and Borgia's image was preserved. This isn't just a historical story. It reveals a key principle of power. Cruelty can be forgiven if it's seen as necessary, limited, and effective. What people don't forgive is cruelty that drags on, that feels pointless, or that's used for personal revenge. And this idea doesn't just apply to politicians. It shows up in leadership everywhere. Think of a manager who needs to lay off part of the team to save the company. If they hesitate, drag it out, or avoid clarity, it creates confusion, fear, and bitterness. But if they act quickly, explain the decision clearly, and move forward, the pain is real, but respect is maintained. In this case, cruelty isn't moral, it's structural. Machiavelli invites us to grow up a bit. Not all pain is injustice. Not all severity is tyranny. Sometimes acting with toughness is the only way to protect something greater: peace, stability, or the survival of the system. But this kind of cruelty must be handled with extreme care. The wise leader doesn't lash out in anger. They don't punish for personal satisfaction. They assess, they decide, and they act. No hesitation, but no excess either. Here's the core of Machiavelli's logic. The more effective the initial act of cruelty, the less you'll need it later. A sharp, strategic blow today might prevent years of future chaos. The point isn't to enjoy causing pain, it's to avoid long-term suffering for everyone else. This turns traditional morality on its head. Most people assume that a good ruler is someone who avoids pain, forgives easily, and never hits hard. But Machiavelli shows us that endless kindness can actually lead to more suffering. A leader who's too afraid to act when it counts can allow enemies to grow stronger and let the people suffer far worse over time. And this applies now more than ever. In today's world, with weak governments, indecisive leaders, and systems afraid of tough decisions, What we often get isn't peace, but disorder. Sometimes, avoiding cruelty just leads to more of it, scattered, unplanned, and much harder to stop. That's why Machiavelli supports rational cruelty. It should be swift, targeted, and if possible, delegated, so the leader maintains their image while restoring control. But he's clear, cruelty must be followed by compassion. Strength must be followed by rebuilding. A ruler can't live with a sword in hand forever. Once the state is stabilized, the leader must build trust, promote justice, and restore the social fabric. This takes wisdom. A leader's power can't rest solely on fear. It has to be based on the belief that when he acted harshly, it was for the greater good, not personal gain. Now think about your own life. How many times have you avoided making a tough call, just to watch the problem get worse? How many times have you delayed a necessary decision and caused more pain down the line? Machiavelli would ask, are you willing to be disliked for a moment? If it means avoiding collapse later, are you strong enough to take the heat for a decision that protects the whole? That's the mark of a real leader. Understanding that power sometimes means doing the hard thing, even if it's lonely. That reckless kindness can be a form of selfishness, and calculated cruelty can be an act of responsibility. If you've been following this series closely, you already know this goes way deeper than surface-level leadership advice. If it's helping you see power more clearly, hit the like button, leave a comment with your thoughts on this ethical dilemma, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter. Because now we shift gears from the sharp edge of cruelty to the softer but equally dangerous illusion of love. A ruler who depends too much on being loved, who follows the will of the people as if it were stable, is always one step from falling. Machiavelli knew, to lead well, you have to understand the emotions of the crowd, and more importantly, how to guide them with strength and strategy. Machiavelli noticed something that many leaders, even today, still refuse to accept. People are fickle. That's not an insult, it's a diagnosis. A clear observation that crowds, when driven by emotion, fear, or hope, can change their minds as quickly as they get fired up. That's why he offers a key lesson. A ruler should not follow the people, he should lead them. Now, in an age like ours, where we value empathy, emotional intelligence, and listening to the people, this idea might sound harsh. But Machiavelli isn't saying leaders should ignore the people. He's saying leaders must understand the true nature of the masses, so they can lead with clarity and strength. The truth is, people, collectively, are emotional. They move in waves: hope, fear, anger, excitement. One minute, they praise a leader as a savior. The next, they call him a tyrant, a single crisis, a well-placed lie, a rumor, and everything changes. The same crowd that cheers today can boo tomorrow. Machiavelli understood this. That's why he warns. A prince who rules based on love or public approval is always at risk. Because that love isn't rational. It's fleeting, dependent on appearances, short-term results, and promises that sound good. That doesn't mean public support isn't important. It is. A ruler without the backing of the people won't last. But that support can't be the foundation of leadership, because it's unstable. A ruler needs stability. So Machiavelli advises leaders to keep the people satisfied enough to avoid revolt, but never dependent on their shifting moods. Power shouldn't rest on applause, but on authority, strategy, control of the narrative, and the courage to make unpopular decisions when necessary. This is a deeply strategic view. People want safety, order, prosperity, but they don't always know how to get it. They don't always understand the consequences of policies, political alliances, or national decisions. A leader who simply follows public opinion becomes a slave to instability. History is full of examples of populist leaders who rose by promising everything and pleasing everyone, only to collapse when reality set in. The people love promises, but demand results. and the gap between the two is massive. A good ruler must be like a captain steering a ship in a storm. He can hear the shouts from the deck, feel the winds of public opinion, but he must keep a steady hand on the wheel. If he tries to please everyone, he sinks. But if he knows where he's going, he can even lead those who doubt him to safety. That takes more than charisma. It takes vision, a deep understanding of the psychology of crowds. Machiavelli knew the people have short memories, are easily swayed by imagery, by symbolic gestures, by emotional speeches. So, a ruler must master communication, not to lie, but to shape, not to deceive, but to guide. Yes, that includes some level of manipulation, but when done right, it serves the greater good. The people need to be protected, even from their own impulses. A good leader doesn't follow the crowd. He's not afraid of it, and he knows how to lead it. This kind of leadership isn't cold, it's responsible. A true Machiavellian leader doesn't underestimate the people, but he doesn't romanticize them either. He understands that human nature, when multiplied in a crowd, behaves differently than the individual. That's why he leads with firmness, patience, and strategy. And maybe this is where many modern leaders go wrong. They want to be loved, popular, and accessible. But by chasing approval, they become prisoners of public mood swings. A strong leader builds trust, but he's also willing to be unpopular if that's what it takes, because the people may revolt in the short term, but in the long run, they'll see who really protected them. And that is one of the greatest. Political virtues. Being strong enough to be unpopular today, knowing you'll be understood tomorrow. Machiavelli believed that time, when used well, is the most honest judge. And a leader who bends with every breeze of public opinion builds nothing that lasts. So think about it. How many leaders have you seen fall because they tried too hard to be liked? How many hesitated out of fear of backlash, only to be undone by their own indecision? Machiavelli reminds us, the people need direction, not submission. They want stability, not hesitation. Real respect comes from firmness, not flattery. And if the masses are unstable and emotional, then a leader can't afford to be ruled by emotion. He must act with reason, with calculation. And that leads to something even more dangerous than public mood swings. A sentimental ruler. Machiavelli warns, when a leader governs with his heart on his sleeve, vulnerable to emotion, he loses the clarity and toughness needed to make hard decisions. There's a popular image of a leader, someone empathetic, who deeply feels the pain of the people, who cries during speeches and makes decisions from the heart. It's a beautiful image, but for Machiavelli, it's dangerous. The Florentine thinker believed that politics is a cold game, a field where emotional decisions don't just fail, they can destroy entire nations. The reason is simple. Power isn't sustained by feelings. It demands calculation, analysis, strategy. A leader must see beyond the emotion of the moment and anticipate the consequences of their actions. A sentimental ruler might gain short-term popularity, but risks making decisions that turn into disasters down the line. For Machiavelli, the ideal leader isn't cruel, but he is clear-minded. He feels like any human being, but doesn't let those feelings take control. He knows that too much compassion can become weakness, that anger can lead to recklessness, that trying too hard to please can create vulnerability. That's why he leads with reason as his compass and the heart as a warning signal, never the main guide. Think about it. In a political crisis, an approaching war, or a moment of internal betrayal, a leader who hesitates, who gets emotional, who feels guilty, might put the entire state at risk. But the one who keeps control, even under extreme pressure, has a chance to make the most effective, even if unpopular, decision. This doesn't mean a ruler should be a robot. It means they need emotional discipline. They must know when to listen to the heart and when to silence it. Politics isn't only about ideals, it's about results. And results, for Machiavelli, are what really matter. The tragedy of the sentimental leader is that they often confuse intention with outcome. They believe that because they meant well, the results will be good. But history is full of well-meaning leaders who caused chaos because they didn't think clearly. Politics, unlike everyday morality, doesn't judge intentions, it judges effects. Here's where Machiavelli shows his full intellectual courage. He draws a hard line between being a citizen and being a ruler. A citizen can act with emotion, with generosity, with forgiveness. A ruler cannot. He holds the fate of many in his hands. That demands a kind of rationality that few can handle. This idea echoes in other great political thinkers. Max Weber, for example, spoke of the ethic of responsibility, a specific moral code for politicians, different from the personal morality of everyday people. For Weber, a politician can't just act based on personal values. They must weigh the real-world consequences of their actions. And when we talk about consequences, we have to understand that political time is different from emotional time. Emotions demand immediate reactions. Reason demands patience. The rational ruler doesn't rush. He watches. He waits. He acts when the moment is right, not when emotion pushes him to. Of course, there's a cost. A rational leader will often be labeled as cold, calculating, even heartless. But Machiavelli would say, better to be criticized for being cold than destroyed for being fragile. Power, to last, needs a solid foundation, and feelings, no matter how noble, are quicksand. Look at the world today. How many leaders cave to short-term public pressure? How many make choices based on social media trends, headlines, or to look good to the public? Machiavelli would have warned, that's governing with your gut, and those who lead with their gut often bleed in the end. Rational leadership also requires a rare skill, the ability to say no, to deny favors, disappoint expectations, draw lines. The sentimental leader can't. They want to please everyone. The rational one knows that leading isn't about pleasing. It's about protecting, deciding, and sometimes frustrating people for a greater good. Even more, the rational leader understands that the most effective decisions aren't always the prettiest. Sometimes, you have to choose the lesser of two evils. Sometimes, the best option is far from the ideal. A mature leader accepts that. A sentimental one refuses to see it and breaks. This view may seem harsh, but it has a goal: to protect the people from chaos. Because if there's anything more dangerous than a cold leader, it's the disorder caused by an emotionally unstable one. And believe this, in the end, people respect a leader who delivers results more than one who sheds tears. Because in politics and in life, what matters isn't just how you feel, but how wisely you act. Now tell me, have you ever seen a political or organizational decision fail because of too much emotion? Have you watched leaders get swallowed by their own reactions while calmer heads stayed strong? If so, drop a comment below. I want to hear your take on emotion versus reason in leadership, because if a leader must govern with reason, not emotion, they also need to master the tools that move the hearts of the people. And one of the oldest, most powerful, and most easily manipulated is religion. Few topics spark more tension than religion and power. Put them together, and you've got one of the most explosive combinations in human history. Machiavelli understood this, and as always, he doesn't sugarcoat it. Religion can and should be used as a political tool, but let's be clear. He's not talking about genuine faith, sincere spirituality, or the search for the divine. Machiavelli is talking about religion's usefulness in politics, its ability to unite people, reinforce public morals, and legitimize the ruler's authority. To him, the value of religion in political life isn't found in its theological truth, but in its social function. And throughout history, the smartest leaders have understood this. Even if they don't believe everything they preach, using religious symbols, invoking the sacred, and appearing pious can be a highly effective strategy. Why? Because religion, when used wisely, shapes behavior, teaches obedience, instills fear of punishment, and hope for reward. In other words, it creates a shared sense of order, something every strong state depends on. Machiavelli saw this clearly. He knew religion could shape the behavior of the masses far better than laws or threats. After all, people may fear a ruler's punishment, but they fear God's wrath much more deeply. That's why a ruler, even if personally skeptical, should publicly show respect for religion, support religious institutions, honor traditions, and present themselves as guided by spiritual values. Even if, behind the scenes, they're making decisions based on cold, calculated strategy. To some, that might seem hypocritical, but for Machiavelli, it's necessary. He knew that faith is powerful social glue. Religious rituals strengthen community. Religious morality helps control destructive impulses, and people who fear God are more likely to obey human laws. Once again, Machiavelli breaks from traditional thinking. While Christian philosophers taught that rulers should be morally devout, Machiavelli flips the script. A ruler should appear devout and use that image as a political tool. He's not mocking faith. He's recognizing it as part of the power game. And don't think this is just some outdated theory. This tactic is everywhere today. How many modern leaders use religion symbolically? Quoting scripture, attending services, fasting in public, even when their actions contradict the morals they preach. The point isn't to question anyone's personal faith. The point, as Machiavelli makes clear, is that religion holds political value beyond belief. It unites, it soothes, it legitimizes, and for that reason, it's a powerful ally of power. He also understood the risk of a society without religion, or where religion has lost its influence. Without a higher, symbolic authority guiding collective behavior, people follow only their desires. And then, the state must rely on more force, more policing, more punishment. Religion, therefore, saves the state from having to be harsh all the time. If people fear hell, they're less likely to break the law out of fear, not of prison, but of eternal damnation. And for Machiavelli, anything that lowers the cost of social control is a good thing. But there's a catch. The ruler must never let religion become more powerful than the state. It should serve the government, not rule it. When the clergy controls the prince, politics loses its autonomy. So a wise leader knows where religious influence ends and secular power begins. That distinction is subtle, but crucial. Use religion as a tool. Don't be used by it. Machiavelli admired how the ancient Romans mastered this dynamic. They invoked the gods before battles, held religious festivals to unite the people, and even manipulated divine signs to justify decisions. He didn't see this as falsehood. He saw it as civic wisdom. To him, a great leader sees what actually works. And religion, with all its symbolic, moral, and emotional power, works. Even without faith, it holds force. And for that, it deserves respect as a strategic element of political life. Now think about it. How many times have you been influenced by speeches filled with religious language? How often have public decisions been justified by sacred values? Machiavelli invites you to look deeper, to see religion as part of the theatre of power, and that insight is freeing. Not to reject sincere faith, but to understand how it's used so you won't be manipulated by it. Because if religion is a tool for moral control and social unity, the next question is, how do you control what moves the people the most? Public opinion. It's not enough to command the military or build political alliances. Real power lies in shaping what people believe, or at least in shaping what they think they believe. There's a force just as powerful as the military, and sometimes even more dangerous: public opinion. Long before social media, modern propaganda, or digital marketing, Machiavelli already saw this with brutal clarity. He understood that whoever controls the story controls the power. That's why he said, without hesitation, manipulating public opinion isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. But what does that actually mean? It means a leader must know how to shape and protect their image, to build symbols, messages, and gestures that inspire trust, fear, or admiration, depending on what the moment demands. They need to know what to show, what to hide, and how to guide the public's perception. Because political legitimacy doesn't depend only on what's done, but on how it's perceived. Machiavelli knew that most people don't see what happens behind the scenes. They don't understand backroom deals, the weight of political risks, or the complexity of certain decisions. What people do see and judge is the leader's public image, and it's based on that image that they choose to support, oppose, obey, or revolt. So, an effective leader doesn't just act, they perform. They understand they need to appear strong, fair, compassionate, and decisive, even when making tough, unpopular, or morally grey decisions. Because to stay in power, appearing virtuous is often more important than actually being virtuous. And this truth is even more relevant today. We live in the era of information and misinformation. Reality often matters less than the narrative. A single video, speech, or headline can shift public opinion in minutes. Leaders who don't get this are vulnerable. Those who master it survive. Machiavelli didn't call it marketing, but that's exactly what he was describing. He talked about the importance of image, performance, and well-crafted messaging. He warned that people judge more with their eyes than with reason. So, a leader must decide how they want to be seen and work to make that perception stick. Now, don't confuse manipulating public opinion with flat-out lying. Machiavelli wasn't saying to invent a fake reality, but to structure the truth politically. Highlight certain facts, downplay others, emphasize what builds strength, quietly remove what creates doubt. It's not deception, it's strategy. And there's a deep reason behind this. As we saw earlier, the public is emotional and reactive. People respond to symbols, speeches, powerful gestures. So the one who controls perception gains huge advantage, anticipating reactions, neutralizing threats, guiding emotions. Machiavelli saw power as a kind of theatre. In that play, the ruler is actor, writer, and director all at once. He can't afford to be spontaneous all the time. Every word, every gesture, every silence matters. Everything communicates, and anything can be used against you. To some, that sounds cynical, but it's actually a form of respect for leadership. A leader doesn't just represent themselves, they represent the state. That's why they must manage their image or be ruled by it. History gives us plenty of examples. Napoleon was a master of self-mythology, even spinning his losses into stories of heroism. Hitler, chillingly, understood propaganda better than most. Churchill turned fear into courage through powerful speeches. In modern times, we see the same pattern. Presidents dominating social media, CEOs crafting company culture, influencers shaping entire worldviews with a single post. Whether they realize it or not, they're all using Machiavellian tactics. Now think, how many times have you formed opinions based on how something looked or sounded without knowing all the facts? How often has an image impacted your thinking more than the reality behind it? Machiavelli would say, that's human nature. And that's why leaders must lead not just in policy, but in perception. But as always, here's a warning. Manipulating public opinion requires restraint and responsibility. Do it too crudely, too dishonestly, or too arrogantly, and it backfires. People can be fooled for a while, but not forever. So a smart leader uses this tool wisely, not to create a fake world, but to protect what matters, guide focus to what's important, and shield what's vulnerable. In short, Machiavelli tells us, in the game of power, controlling reality isn't as important as controlling people's perception of it. And those who understand that lead with more confidence because they govern not just institutions, but also hearts and minds. And speaking of perception, what about betrayal? That thing we all claim to hate, but that, in some situations, might not only be justified, but necessary, because not all betrayal is a moral failure. Sometimes to betray is to protect, to act before the poison spreads. Would you like me to translate the next one too? 13. Betrayal can be an act of loyalty to the greater good, the good. As old as power itself, betrayal carries a shadow that shocks, outrages, and fascinates. It's condemned morally, dramatized in tragedies, and feared in palaces. It's a constant companion in political history. And Machiavelli, never afraid to speak uncomfortable truths, says what few dare to admit: betrayal, when done right, can be a legitimate tool. That statement might sound outrageous. After all, we're raised to believe betrayal is the worst of all crimes. Judas, Brutus, traitors to the nation, they're all cast as villains. But Machiavelli looks beyond traditional morality. He asks, what's worse, betraying one man or letting an entire country fall into enemy hands? His answer is clear. Politics can't be judged by the same standards as private life. In the name of preserving the state, certain acts, even those that seem morally unacceptable, can become not just justifiable, but necessary. For Machiavelli, betrayal stops being a personal failure and becomes a strategic move, if it serves a higher purpose, protecting legitimate power, maintaining public peace, and preserving political order. What matters isn't the act itself, but what it prevents or achieves. And that's the core idea. Not all betrayal is acceptable, only the one that's calculated, precise, purposeful, and executed at the right moment. Betrayal as political: surgery, a cut that prevents collapse, a poison that removes a quiet threat, a hard choice made by someone strong enough to carry the weight others couldn't bear. Imagine this. A powerful ally starts scheming behind the scenes, smiles in public, but secretly makes deals with the enemy. Waiting to confirm their intentions could be fatal. Acting too soon might seem unjust, but ignoring the risk, that could cost you everything. Machiavelli would ask, are you willing to be betrayed for the sake of honor? Or will you betray first to save what you lead? In this context, betrayal isn't cowardice. It's prevention, and it requires something rare: coldness. Even when justified, betrayal comes with consequences. The people may not understand. You could be seen as disloyal. Your reputation might take a hit. That's why effective betrayal must be silent, strategic, layered in justification, and, ideally, carried out by someone else. Machiavelli knew leaders can't always get their own hands dirty. Often, it's better to delegate the unpopular act, stay distant from the blood, and if needed, later sacrifice the traitor to preserve public trust. It's a brutal game, but it's the game of power. History offers plenty of examples. In ancient Rome, Cicero ordered the execution of conspirators without trial to protect the Republic. In modern times, how many leaders have quietly removed allies who turned into hidden threats? The dilemma is always the same: betray one to save many, or be betrayed by holding on to blind loyalty. Machiavelli's answer is pragmatic. The state matters more than personal honor. And in this game, betrayal isn't weakness, it's a weapon. But it also demands constant vigilance. The internal threat is always more dangerous than the external enemy. The leader who trusts too easily, who ignores the signs, who refuses to act when danger is still quiet, often falls at the hands of those once closest to them. So, strategic betrayal is also a test of leadership. It shows who's willing to do what's necessary, even at the cost of misunderstanding. Who can see beyond conventional morality and realize that in politics, the choice is rarely between good and evil, but between two evils, And sometimes, betraying one person is the only way to avoid betraying an entire nation. Now ask yourself, how many times has loyalty been used as a mask by someone already preparing to betray? How many alliances seemed solid until someone's interests changed? Machiavelli doesn't want you to become paranoid. He wants you to see clearly, because in power, naivety is fatal. And anyone who confuses personal ethics with state strategy is at risk of going down as a noble but fallen leader. And if betrayal is sometimes necessary to eliminate threats, then the next logical step is knowing how to deal with enemies who don't hide at all, because sometimes the threat is out in the open. And in those cases, Machiavelli has even clearer advice. Your enemies must be destroyed, decisively. Would you like me to translate the next chapter too? There are moments in leadership when hesitation is no longer an option. When a threat is real, open, and present, the worst mistake a ruler can make is acting with half strength. For Machiavelli, this is a non-negotiable rule. Enemies should not be managed. They should be destroyed. Sounds harsh, yes. Extreme, absolutely. But history, that ruthless teacher of reality, shows us again and again. Leaving enemies alive is like lighting a fuse and pretending the bomb isn't there. Machiavelli's logic is simple. Half measures don't bring peace, they only delay disaster. An opponent who isn't removed can regroup, build alliances, infiltrate the system, and strike back harder later. A ruler who spares them out of weakness or vanity is setting the stage for their own downfall. He's not talking about ideological opponents or everyday critics. He's talking about true threats to the stability of power, the functioning of the state, and the ruler's legitimate authority. And against those threats, it's not enough to isolate, negotiate, or lightly punish. The response must be decisive, and if necessary, severe. This perspective doesn't come from a love of violence. Machiavelli wasn't a sadist. He was a strategist. He understood that concentrated cruelty in the short term can prevent much greater suffering later. A well-placed strike today might prevent a civil war tomorrow. Removing a dangerous enemy now might save thousands of lives later. It's the idea of a surgical cut, painful but necessary, and above all, effective. History gives us endless examples. How many leaders tried to coexist with internal enemies, only to be overthrown by them? How many dictators spared disloyal generals, only to be killed by them? How many democracies crumbled from within because their leaders hesitated when facing threats that wanted to destroy them? Machiavelli learned this from watching the fragmented Italy of his time, full of betrayals, collapsed alliances, and foreign invasions. In that chaos, he came to a simple truth. Either the ruler eliminates the danger, or the danger eliminates the ruler. And there's more. A decisive act not only solves the problem, it sends a message. It shows strength. It earns respect. It warns potential traitors. When one enemy falls clearly and completely, others think twice before trying anything similar. But when a leader hesitates, punishes softly, or pretends to forgive, it doesn't inspire loyalty. It signals weakness. And in politics, weakness is an open invitation to betrayal. Think about it. If you were an adversary, who would you fear more? A leader who hesitates and tries to please everyone, or one who strikes back with precision and force when threatened? The answer is obvious. Real power isn't maintained with charm or inspiring speeches alone. It's built on visible authority, decisive action, and the courage to cut when needed. But beware, destroying an enemy isn't about rage. It's not personal. It's political. It requires planning, the right timing, and discretion. The action must be final, but not flashy. The goal isn't to humiliate, it's to neutralize. And that takes more than brute strength. It takes intelligence, knowing where to strike, who to strike, when to strike, and after the strike, how to quickly restore order. Because yes, after destruction comes reconstruction. A ruler cannot live in constant war. The power used to eliminate a threat must be followed by stability, reconciliation, and peace. If not, the cycle of violence continues. Machiavelli is clear. There's no room for romanticism in real politics. Forgiving someone who wants to destroy you isn't a virtue. It's foolishness. And contrary to what many believe, being firm doesn't make a leader less legitimate. In fact, people respect leaders who protect the state, even when it requires tough measures. And if you think this sounds extreme, ask yourself, how many times in your life have you tried to keep the peace with someone who kept sabotaging you? How many times have you taken the middle road only to watch the problem come back stronger? Machiavelli invites you to reflect. Sometimes, the only way to protect the whole is to eliminate the part that threatens it. If this message got you thinking, like this video, share it with someone who avoids confrontation at all costs and comment below. Do you think that, in certain situations, going all in is the only option? And of course, subscribe to the channel to keep following this series on the raw and very real truths of power. And if strength is the tool for final decisions, institutions are the pillars that keep that strength standing long term. And that brings us to another uncomfortable truth from Machiavelli. Institutions aren't sacred. They exist to serve power, not the other way around. Would you like the next chapter translated as well? One of the core beliefs in modern politics, especially in liberal democracies, is that institutions exist to limit power. They're seen as safeguards against abuse, checks on tyranny, and guarantors of fairness and balance. But Machiavelli, always ready to challenge comforting illusions, offers a radical perspective. Institutions should not rule over power. They should serve it. To him, the state exists to maintain order, protect sovereignty, and ensure stability. Anything that doesn't fulfill that role, no matter how noble it sounds on paper, should be reformed or discarded. That includes institutions. They aren't sacred. They're not untouchable. They're tools. And like any tool, they should adapt to the needs of the moment. It's a bold and uncomfortable idea, because it flips the common belief that power must submit to the system. Machiavelli turns that logic upside down. The system must serve power. What's at stake isn't the purity of the structure. It's the survival of leadership, the continuity of government, and the stability of the state. Institutions that block a ruler's decisions in times of crisis, protect private interests, or become independent power centers are a threat to legitimate authority. A wise leader must have the courage and the skill to reform them. Machiavelli saw this clearly in the political chaos of his time. Italian cities were split by factionalism, deadlocked by internal disputes, and run by courts that served the elite more than the people. In these cases, institutions weren't protecting justice, they were protecting dysfunction, and the result was always the same: disorder, instability, and the fall of the ruler. That's why he argued that institutions should be shaped to protect centralized power. They should allow a leader to act decisively, eliminate threats, govern with authority, and maintain public control. They must be allies of the state, not obstacles. Now, that doesn't mean Machiavelli dismissed the importance of laws, legal systems, or stable institutions. Quite the opposite. He valued a well-structured system as long as it supported the political mission. The problem arises when institutions become self-serving, controlled by elites or populist factions, and end up weakening legitimate leadership. It's a pragmatic view and a tough pill to swallow for those who cling to idealistic visions of democracy or institutional neutrality. But Machiavelli reminds us there's no such thing as neutrality in politics. Every institution serves a purpose, and every purpose serves someone. The real question is, does it serve the state or weaken it? This logic still applies today. How many governments have been paralyzed by gridlocked legislatures? How many presidents have fallen because they couldn't pass essential reforms due to hostile courts or broken parliaments? How many well-meaning constitutions became cages that trapped those trying to govern? Machiavelli saw it coming. He knew that leaders need tools that are both stable and flexible. Institutions must provide order, but also allow for action. They must balance power, but not choke it, and that takes rare skill, reforming institutions without destroying order. A capable leader doesn't burn the system down. He redesigns it. He knows which parts to keep, which to fix, and which to dismantle. And he adjusts the state to meet the demands of the moment, with courage and intelligence. But that's no easy task. Reforming institutions means going up against entrenched interests, breaking down privileges, and confronting long-standing myths. It takes authority, strategic vision, and a willingness to be unpopular. Leaders who dare to do it must be ready to take hits, but also ready to win. And here's the key. A leader can't fear backlash from the system. He must act with strength, because institutions, when they sense weakness, grow into the power vacuum. But when they feel real authority, they step back. This isn't about dictatorship, it's about leadership. A ruler shouldn't dismantle the rule of law, but he must be the one guiding its direction. The law exists to serve the people, and the people live under the protection of power. When that chain breaks, the state collapses. Now think about it. How often have you seen institutions that seemed fair in theory paralyze action in practice? How many well-meaning governments have been crushed by red tape, partisan courts, or legislatures that ruled by blackmail? Machiavelli pushes you toward political maturity. The goal isn't to destroy institutions, it's to master them, to make sure they serve order, legitimate power, and the common good, to make sure the state works, even in the middle of chaos. And if power must shape institutions to survive, sometimes it must also embrace chaos, or even use it strategically. Because the true ruler doesn't fear disorder, he understands it, and when needed, he knows how to unleash it. Most of the time, chaos is seen as the enemy of the state, a sign of collapse, of lost control, of instability. But Machiavelli, with his cold and strategic view of politics, saw something different. He understood that chaos, when managed correctly, can be a powerful tool for those looking to maintain and even strengthen power. That's right. Disorder doesn't always need to be avoided at all costs. Sometimes it can, and should, be used. This idea is uncomfortable because it directly challenges common sense. We expect a good leader to bring peace, stability, and order. And generally that's true. But Machiavelli teaches us that, at certain moments, instability itself can be created or allowed as a strategy to consolidate authority. Why? Because the fear of chaos, of social collapse or civil war, pushes people to accept measures they would normally reject. When disorder sets in, or even looks like it might, the public cries out for protection, for firmness, for a strong leader who will restore order, and that's when the ruler steps in, not as the one who caused the chaos, but as the only one capable of stopping it, the restorer, the savior, the one fixed point in the middle of the storm. Machiavelli saw this firsthand in his time. Fragmented Italy, full of wars between cities, rival princes, foreign invasions, and internal factions, constantly gave examples of how disorder was used as justification to centralize power. Leaders who were once seen as too harsh suddenly became the people's only hope for stability. Chaos creates opportunity, and the smart leader knows how to recognize it. But make no mistake, this doesn't mean promoting total destruction. Machiavelli's not suggesting the prince should throw the people into despair just to show up later as the hero. That would be self-destructive. What he proposes is much more subtle. A controlled level of instability, a manageable tension, a visible threat, but one that never spirals out of control. This kind of strategic chaos can show up in many forms. An economic crisis, social unrest, a foreign threat. The ruler doesn't have to create these situations. He just needs to avoid solving them completely. Let them linger just long enough for his presence to seem essential, or even amplify the public's sense of danger, so people don't question his authority. That's the logic of the useful crisis. When there's chaos, there's fear. And when there's fear, power expands. You might be wondering, does this still happen today? The answer is yes, all the time. Modern leaders, in different parts of the world, rely on public fear to justify surveillance, repression, loss of freedoms, or the expansion of executive power. And here's the thing, they often do it with public support, because people give up freedom for the promise of safety, forgetting that once power is given, it's rarely returned. Machiavelli understood that most people prefer order over freedom. They want security, stability, and peace. And when faced with the threat of chaos, they'll accept even authoritarian leaders, as long as they promise protection. It's one of the most effective engines of politics. Create a problem and present yourself as the only solution. Or simply let the problem grow until the people beg for exceptional measures, then apply those measures with their blessing. And to Machiavelli, that's not immoral. In fact, it's smart governance. Because in his view, morality in politics should be judged by results. If controlled chaos restores order and protects the state, it's a legitimate move. What would be truly wrong is letting the state collapse out of weakness or naivete. Still, like any powerful tool, chaos must be used carefully. If it gets out of control, it can destroy the very leader who allowed it. That's why the ruler must act with intelligence and discipline. He must know how far to let things go, when to stop it, and how to use it as a bridge towards stronger control. That ability to manage chaos without being destroyed by it is what separates weak rulers from Machiavellian ones. It's the art of turning crisis into opportunity, disorder into narrative, fear into loyalty. What about you? Have you ever noticed how collective fear can be used as a tool for control? Have you seen leaders gain power during crises, even when they cause the crisis themselves? Machiavelli wants you to open your eyes. Don't confuse the restorer of order with the source of disorder. Sometimes, they're the same person, and recognizing that doesn't make you cynical, it makes you clear-eyed. Chaos is unpredictable, power is unstable. That's why the ruler must always stay alert, because power is like the tide, it rises and falls. And if the prince wants to survive, he must understand the cycle and always be ready to change with it. No position of power lasts forever. No achievement is permanently guaranteed. For Machiavelli, this is one of the most fundamental and most ignored truths in politics. Power is, by nature, unstable, volatile, and cyclical. And any leader who forgets that is already starting to fall. It's easy to get comfortable during periods of stability, when everything seems to be going well, when authority is solid, when popularity is high. The natural instinct is to relax, to let your guard down, to believe tomorrow will look like today. But Machiavelli warns, that's the first step toward ruin, because the landscape changes, allies change, the people change, political moods, social tensions, economic pressures, everything is constantly shifting. A leader who governs as if the world is standing still is already behind. And in politics, whoever acts too late usually acts in vain. Machiavelli had a deeply realistic view of political time. He knew that history moves in cycles, times of order and chaos, stability and crisis, rise and fall. That's why a ruler needs more than strength. They need awareness of timing. They must sense the winds changing before anyone else. It's like an experienced sailor. He doesn't wait for the storm to hit before adjusting the sails. He reads the wind, watches the sky, feels the pressure shift, and then he acts before the waves crash in. That's the kind of vigilance Machiavelli expects from a leader, and this awareness isn't just external, it's internal too. Instability doesn't only come from outside forces. A ruler can lose power to external enemies, sure, but they can also lose it through overconfidence, pride, or failure to realize their political moment has changed, and that they must change with it. One of the most common mistakes among leaders is believing that what worked yesterday will work tomorrow. They repeat slogans, reuse alliances, stick to old methods, even when the context has shifted. They act with the mindset of a past era, trying to apply outdated solutions to brand new problems. The result: irrelevance, weakness, collapse. Machiavelli, on the other hand, offers a different path. Power in motion. A leader who reinvents, adapts, studies the present with the clear understanding that they can be replaced at any time, and stays in power only because they never stop moving. The instability of power isn't a flaw in the system, it's the natural condition of politics. Cycles happen because people change, needs shift, pressures build. A leader who understands this doesn't cling to what they've already achieved. They keep their eyes on what's still ahead. Now that doesn't mean living in paranoia. It means living with clarity. Knowing that nothing is permanent is the key to maintaining power, because when you know you can lose it, you protect it more, wisely. Machiavelli taught that fortune, that unpredictable force of luck, controls half of our lives, but the other half is up to virtù, our ability to anticipate, adapt, and act. And that virtue is what lets a ruler navigate political uncertainty with strength. This idea applies just as much to a global empire as it does to a company, a local government, or a team. Every leader faces cycles of growth and decline, and they all need the same skill: reading the moment and acting before it's too late. In practice, this means making moves before the crisis hits, reforming structures before they break down, changing your tone, your alliances, your approach before the public shifts without you. A leader who stays one step ahead survives. A leader who responds too late disappears. But keep in mind, this ability to adapt isn't about being flaky. It's not about betraying your beliefs every time the wind changes. It's about staying loyal to your core responsibility as a leader, to protect the state and maintain order. And to do that, you must move with the current of history, not fight against it. How many leaders have we seen fall because they didn't know when to step aside? How many kingdoms collapsed because their rulers clung to outdated methods, ignoring every sign that their time had passed? How many leaders, by resisting change, became symbols of a past their people no longer wanted? With his hard-edged wisdom, Machiavelli reminds us, power is like a wave. You either ride it or get swallowed by it. And what about you? Have you noticed how the greatest danger often shows up when everything seems under control? Have you seen leaders lose everything because they believed their position was permanent? Power is unstable, which means it must always be ready for conflict, and not just any conflict. According to Machiavelli, war isn't a failure of politics. It's a natural extension of it. A wise leader doesn't seek peace at any cost. He understands that sometimes war isn't a mistake. It's a tool. Most people see war as the collapse of civilization, a mistake, a tragedy, a sign that all diplomatic efforts have failed. But Machiavelli, as always, has no romantic illusions. To him, war is not a breakdown of politics. It's the natural continuation of it. That's not to say he glorifies violence or believes conflict is ideal. It's simply an acknowledgement of a historical and human truth. Where there is politics, there is a struggle for power. And where there's a struggle for power, war is always a possibility. A leader who forgets this, who believes too much in everlasting peace, eternal treaties, and effortless stability, is setting themselves up to be defeated. Machiavelli understood that politics, by nature, is a constant power struggle. And when talk, deals, and alliances aren't enough, armed conflict is just the next chapter. War doesn't begin when the first shot is fired. It begins long before, in silence, schemes, and suspicion. That's why a wise leader never lets their guard down. A ruler should always be preparing for war, even during peace, especially during peace, because that's when most leaders get comfortable, assume the enemy won't come, and become vulnerable. Machiavelli says it clearly. A prince should have no other objective, no other thought, nor take anything else as his art, but that of war. That might sound extreme, but there's deep logic behind it. War, or constant preparation for it, is what keeps the political machine sharp. When a state drifts too far from the art of war, it becomes weak. Its armies lose morale, its borders grow soft, Its leadership loses the respect of allies and invites the attention of enemies. And Machiavelli wasn't only talking about war in the physical sense, he was also referring to political war, internal power struggles, conspiracies, party, rivalries, and attacks on a ruler's legitimacy. All of it is war, just with different weapons. That's why a leader must train for war in mindset as well. Learn to spot enemies, map out the battlefield, anticipate the attack, be willing to fight when necessary, but most of all, always be ready. For Machiavelli, war is a school, a place of discipline, awareness, and strategy. He admired military leaders like Alexander, Caesar, and Hannibal. In them, he saw the qualities most rulers lacked: courage, decisiveness, mental clarity, and constant readiness. Not because they loved war, but because they understood it was their duty. They knew power only lasts when it's respected, and often, respect comes through strength. And what about those leaders who avoid conflict at all costs? Machiavelli is blunt. They pave the road to their own downfall. Because when an enemy senses that a leader won't fight, they see it as an opportunity. Fear of war doesn't prevent war, it invites aggression. That's the core of deterrence. True peace only exists when war remains a real possibility. A state that is ready and willing to defend itself, that projects strength and discipline, keeps enemies away not out of kindness, but out of fear. This leads to an important reflection. A ruler must practice the art of war not only with troops, but with vision. Yes, train your generals, but also train yourself in strategy, anticipation, and focus, because conflict will come, and only those who are prepared will still be standing. Machiavelli also warned against relying on outside forces. He distrusted mercenaries and foreign troops. A truly loyal army, he believed, is one made of your own people. A hired army might fight, but it won't die for you. A citizen army defends what's theirs. That has deep implications. Military strength reflects political strength. When a ruler has the support of strong, well-trained, loyal forces, they rule with confidence. But when they rely on fragile alliances or paid soldiers, they're walking on unstable ground. And look at the world today. How many modern leaders ignore these lessons? How many avoid confrontation, make endless compromises, and believe peace sustains itself? History shows us time and again, conflict always returns, and those who aren't ready fall first. For Machiavelli, war is the natural state of politics. That doesn't mean it should always be pursued, but it should never be forgotten. Because a ruler who doesn't prepare for it, even in calm times, is already at a disadvantage, long before the first blow is struck. And you? Have you noticed how many leaders fall not because of the war itself, but because of the illusion of peace that lulled them beforehand? Have you seen alliances fall apart, nations collapse, companies fail, simply because their leaders weren't ready for conflict? Machiavelli invites you to stay alert. Don't confuse the one who restores order with the one who caused the chaos. Sometimes, they're the same person. And knowing that doesn't make you cynical, it makes you clear-eyed. War is unpredictable, and power is unstable. So a true leader must always be ready, because no victory lasts forever. No throne is guaranteed. Power is like the tide. It rises and falls. And to survive, the prince must learn to ride the waves. If there's one lesson Machiavelli repeats throughout The Prince, it's this. Never trust mercenaries, no matter how well-armed they are, how experienced they seem, or how convincing their contracts sound. They don't fight for you, they fight for themselves. And here, Machiavelli is talking about more than just war. He's talking about loyalty, about real commitment to power, about who's actually willing to die for the state, and who's just cashing a paycheck, ready to switch sides the moment it benefits them. To Machiavelli, the ideal army is made up of the people, of citizens from your own land, men who fight for their homeland, their families, their leader, because they know that if they lose, it's not just their boss who fails, it's everything they love that collapses. That kind of bond makes a national army infinitely more reliable than hired soldiers. Why is this so important? Because in the game of power, force is the final argument. When alliances fail, diplomacy ends, or chaos threatens. It's soldiers who hold the line and keep the ruler in power. And if those soldiers have no real loyalty, if they're only there for money, the prince is at the mercy of strangers. Machiavelli was blunt. Mercenary troops are useless and dangerous. Anyone who relies on them for the safety of their state will never be secure. And he had good reason to think that way. In his time, he saw city after city in Italy, Florence, Milan, Venice, fall victim to their reliance on mercenary armies. These troops, made up of foreign fighters or paid locals, often switched sides for better pay. The result? Humiliating defeats, betrayal on the battlefield, and sudden collapses of governments. He understood that real strength comes from the ground up, from a connection between the people and the state. When the army belongs to the people, there's more than just military training. There's passion, identity, and purpose. The soldier doesn't just follow orders, he believes in the fight. And this applies not just to literal battlefields, but to the symbolic wars of politics. A leader surrounded by political mercenaries, fair-weather allies, opportunistic advisors, career-focused bureaucrats, lives in constant danger. They might be loyal today and turn tomorrow. But those who are part of the political project, who believe in it, who defend it because it's their own, are real assets. And Machiavelli would say they're worth more than 1,000 well-trained mercenaries. That's why he insists. A wise prince doesn't just have a national army. He values it, trains it, and honors it. Because when crisis comes, that army is what will stand by his side. And here's another key point. It's not enough to simply have your own army. It must be effective, well-trained, motivated, and properly equipped. It's not about quantity. It's about quality and readiness. That preparation, by the way, is one of the prince's top responsibilities. Keeping the people armed and the army ready, not just as military policy, but as a way to strengthen the bond between ruler and people. It shows that the leader trusts his people and that the people are part of the nation's strength. Machiavelli believed that a population willing to take up arms to defend its country is a population that's freer, more engaged, and harder to dominate. That's why he criticized not just mercenaries, but also rulers who disarm their people and outsource their security. In Machiavelli's view, national strength equals sovereignty. Every time a leader depends on external forces, military, economic, or ideological, they weaken their grip on power. And this lesson is still relevant today. How many leaders build their power on mercenaries? International consultants, private security firms, foreign lobbyists, corporate interests, all dressed up as allies, but ready to disappear at the first sign of trouble. Machiavelli invites us to ask a simple but crucial question. Who would really defend your power if everything collapsed? Who would stand by you, not out of convenience, but out of conviction? Who would carry your flag when the wind changes? If your answer is no one, your power is already compromised. And you? Have you ever seen alliances fall apart when things got tough? Have you seen leaders surrounded by flatterers and self-serving? Advisors who vanished when things went south? Machiavelli would say they were surrounded by mercenaries and paid the price. If this reflection helped you see power more clearly, give the video a like, leave a comment about how you view loyalty in politics or leadership, and share it with someone who still thinks money buys true loyalty. Because if loyal force is essential, then information is the most powerful invisible weapon. It's not enough to have strength. You need to know where and when to use it. And that kind of wisdom comes from one essential source: knowledge. For Machiavelli, power isn't just held up by force, alliances, or institutions. There's something less visible, but just as important, that every leader needs if they want to not only gain power, but actually keep it: information. And in this quiet game of political intelligence, spies and informants are the most valuable players on the board. Machiavelli doesn't romanticize power. He sees it for what it is, full of risks, betrayal, hidden enemies, and unreliable allies. In that world, not knowing what's happening behind the scenes is political suicide. That's why he's so direct. A ruler without reliable sources of information is governing in the dark. Spies, or in today's language, intelligence agents, aren't just helpful. They're the invisible eyes of power. They let a leader see what no one else can. They spot betrayal before it breaks out. They uncover secret deals, identify sabotage, and reveal true intentions hiding behind fake smiles. In The Prince, Machiavelli openly praises the use of spies and says that holding on to power depends on knowing more than people want you to know. He points to famous leaders from history, like Persian kings and Roman emperors, who never made big moves without intel from inside enemy territory. Because in politics, appearances can be deceiving, but the backstage tells the truth, and only the one who knows what's happening backstage truly has control. But Machiavelli doesn't stop there. A ruler doesn't just need to know what enemies are planning. He also needs to know what his allies are thinking, because some of the greatest threats come from within, from the inner circle, from those who smile in public and plot in private. That's why, according to him, the ruler must build a steady network of inside information, not to become paranoid, but to protect the state, to make sure strategic decisions are based on reality, not illusion. This is the art of vigilance, not heavy-handed control of the people, but quiet monitoring of the political forces operating beneath the surface. It takes discretion, patience, and deep trust in the right people in the right places. And if this seems excessive, think about history. How many empires have collapsed because of bad intel? How many presidents were betrayed by people they trusted? How many leaders were blindsided by secret deals or scandals that were brewing while they looked the other way? Machiavelli would say, they didn't fall because of bad luck. They fell because they were blind. They forgot the most basic rule of staying in power: know what's going on, even when no one wants you to. But here's the catch. Information alone isn't enough. It has to be understood, verified, and used wisely. A good ruler needs to analyze what they hear, separate facts from rumors, and turn knowledge into action. Because it's no use knowing an enemy is moving if you're too afraid or too slow to act. And information isn't just defensive, it's also a weapon. The leader can and should use it to manipulate, weaken, or divide their enemies. A well-timed rumor, a secret dropped at just the right moment, a traitor who suddenly realizes they've been watched all along. All of that is part of the game. Machiavelli didn't believe there were moral limits in this area. For him, the survival of the state justified espionage, because when it comes to protecting something greater, not knowing is worse than acting harshly. And this doesn't apply only to traditional politics. In business, in social life, even in personal relationships of power, whoever has quality information has the upper hand. If you live only by appearances, public statements, and the official story, you're always playing from behind. True, leadership requires vision, action, and information. Now ask yourself, how many times have you been caught off guard by something that, looking back, had warning signs? How many times did you trust too easily when you should have looked just a little deeper? Machiavelli isn't telling you to be paranoid. He's telling you to be sharp. Trust, yes, but verify. Blind trust is a luxury power can't afford because, in the end, truth doesn't always win on its own. Sometimes, what keeps power isn't who you really are. It's what people think you are. In politics, truth has a silent enemy, appearance. And according to Machiavelli, appearance often wins. It shapes public opinion, wins hearts, and keeps rulers on their thrones. That's why he says, with the cold clarity of someone who truly understands power, a leader doesn't need to be moral. He just needs to appear moral. That statement can feel uncomfortable. It sounds cynical, maybe even hypocritical. After all, shouldn't we want leaders who are honest, ethical, and driven by high moral values? Machiavelli isn't against virtue itself. What he's against is the naive belief that virtue alone is enough to hold power. In reality, people can't see into a leader's heart. They see the image that's presented to them. They're not inside the palace, watching difficult decisions play out. They don't witness the ethical dilemmas behind closed doors. They judge leaders by what they seem to be. That's why Machiavelli teaches, build the image of morality. Be seen as fair, compassionate, honest, righteous, even if, behind the scenes, you have to be ruthless, cunning, or even cruel. People can forgive many things, but they rarely forgive a leader who looks immoral. This ties into a core principle of Machiavellian politics. The stability of the state matters more than the personal morality of the ruler. If keeping the country safe and avoiding chaos means acting immorally in private, then so be it, as long as the public sees a leader who looks dignified and ethical. This is where the art of deception comes in, not as cheap trickery, but as a survival strategy. A leader can't be an open book. He must control his image, manage how he's perceived, and keep up the illusion of virtue, even when reality demands something else. Machiavelli knows this isn't easy. It takes skill to maintain a public image without being exposed. It's not about living a lie. It's about communicating wisely, knowing what to show, what to hide, and how to build a reputation that earns trust. Because in the end, reputation is one of the pillars of power. A leader seen as fair, even if he's done some harsh things in secret, is more likely to hold on to control. But a leader viewed as corrupt or cruel, even if well-intentioned, can lose legitimacy fast. This difference between being and appearing is one of the most revolutionary parts of Machiavelli's thinking. He breaks from the classical view, like Aristotle's, that said good leadership must come from personal moral virtue. Machiavelli flips that idea and says, in politics, what matters is results, and the image that supports them. Look at history. Some leaders were saints, but lost power because they were too soft. Others, tougher and morally questionable, built an image of strength, fairness, and greatness, and stayed in charge. People need to believe. They need to feel secure. They need to trust. And that trust comes from what's visible, not what's hidden. That's why Machiavelli says, protect your image like it's part of your army. Defend it, maintain it, strengthen it. Because losing your reputation is often the first step toward losing power. But be careful. Looking moral doesn't mean looking weak. In fact, it's the opposite. A leader should appear fair, but firm, compassionate, but courageous, ethical, but decisive. The image of morality must come with authority. People admire kindness, but they respect strength. And a true leader needs both in how they present themselves. That takes discipline. A leader has to control not just their actions, but also their words, gestures, even their silences. Every public appearance, every statement helps shape the image, and a strong, consistent image can protect even against real mistakes. Think about it. How many leaders have survived scandals because they had a solid reputation? And how many fell apart over minor issues because the public already saw them as untrustworthy? Machiavelli reminds you, it's not truth that holds power, it's the perception of truth. And if image holds power, then timing is what keeps that image alive. In the next chapter, we'll talk about why, for Machiavelli, doing the right thing isn't enough. You have to do it at the right time. Even the best strategy will fail if the timing is off. The prince must not only know what to do, but when to do it. In the game of power, knowing what to do is important. But knowing when to do it, that's what separates leaders who win from those who fail. For Machiavelli, timing, or more specifically, political timing, is one of the most powerful weapons a ruler can have. It's not enough to be strong, fair, or smart. You have to know the exact moment to act. This sharp sense of timing is a key part of virtù, a central idea in Machiavelli's thought. Virtù doesn't mean virtue in the moral sense. It means the ability to adapt, decide, and take effective action. And part of that effectiveness comes from knowing when to wait, when to strike, and when to hide your true intentions. Many leaders fall because they move too soon. Others fall because they wait too long. The first waste their strength. The second miss their moment. The wise leader, the Machiavellian prince, treats time like a blade, with precision and control. Machiavelli saw politics as a constant dance between power and strategy, between impulse and calculation. That's why he taught that long-lasting power depends on knowing when to act with force, when to step back with patience, and when to disguise your intentions with subtlety. This kind of wisdom isn't theoretical, it's practical, sensitive, almost instinctive. It requires constant attention to the landscape, to the subtle shifts in behavior from allies and enemies. The leader who learns to read these signs moves before the crisis explodes, but not too early. Take strength, for example. It works best when it's unexpected, when resistance is low and the impact is high. If used too soon, it sparks backlash. If used too late, it's no longer enough. Patience, on the other hand, doesn't mean weakness. It's strategic waiting, letting your enemy expose themselves, letting the situation ripen until victory is almost guaranteed. Patience is not doing nothing, it's building your moment. Then there's deception, the refined art of hiding your intentions. Show your cards too soon and the plan collapses. Hold them too long and you lose respect or miss the opportunity. Deception done right is knowing when to speak, when to stay silent, and when to hint at something you have no intention of doing. And here's an uncomfortable truth. Politics doesn't forgive bad timing. The same action that would have made a leader great at the right moment can destroy them if done a day too early or too late. Machiavelli saw this over and over in the actions of the powerful people of his time. Some won it all because they struck in the golden moment. Others lost it all because they hesitated or jumped the gun. And in politics, those mistakes are usually permanent. He saw time as something alive, unstable, like fortune, luck, which moves on its own terms. The leader's job is to master that instability through virtù, to use time not as an enemy, but as an ally, because time, when understood, amplifies action. When ignored, it makes action useless. So how do you develop this sensitivity to timing? Through observation, listening, and analysis. The leader must pay attention to the mood of the people, to the subtle shifts in the political climate, to the quiet movements of rivals. He must learn from the past, but act in the present with an eye toward the future. There's no formula. The right moment can't be taught. It must be felt. And that's why so many fail, because they wait for certainty that never comes. The Machiavellian prince instead acts in uncertainty with confidence, not because he's reckless, but because he knows that in the right moment, risk is opportunity. And this isn't just about politics. It applies in business, in leadership, in life. How many people have lost everything because they spoke too soon, or missed life-changing moments because they hesitated? Machiavelli challenges us to a different kind of courage. The courage to act when no one else is sure. The courage to wait when everyone else is rushing. The courage to deceive when honesty would ruin the plan. Because often, victory doesn't come from how hard you strike, but from when you strike. If this made you reflect, like the video, share it with someone who tends to act on impulse and comment below. Do you think the biggest mistake in leadership is acting too soon or too late? And of course, subscribe to the channel to keep following this series that explores the true, strategic, and raw reality behind the art of power. If timing is what makes action effective, then the next step is understanding what power is made of human nature, because those who don't understand people end up ruled by them. Most political theories start with a pretty picture of human nature. They assume people are basically good, that they want the common good, that they act with justice, gratitude, and honesty. But Machiavelli didn't write for idealists. He wrote for people who actually want to govern. And that's why he begins with a harsh truth. Human beings are, by nature, selfish, unstable, and corruptible. That's not a hateful view. It's a realistic one. And according to Machiavelli, you can't rule effectively if you don't start from that truth. He believed it's a mistake to expect virtue from the masses or individuals. In times of peace and comfort, people might seem generous, loyal, and fair. But when resources get tight, fear kicks in, or power's on the line, their true nature comes out: self-interest. That's why a leader can't rely on gratitude, affection, or spontaneous loyalty. Those feelings are fragile. They fade quickly. They're like smoke. Nice to look at, but not something you can build a government on. Machiavelli said, people are generally ungrateful, deceitful, cowardly in the face of danger, and always hungry for personal gain. Harsh? Yes, but not an attack on humanity. He's just saying, if this is the material you're working with, then be ready for it. This view of human nature is the backbone of all Machiavellian thought. A leader who believes too much in people's goodness acts naively. He opens himself up. He trusts the wrong people, and sooner or later, he pays the price. But a leader who sees the limits of human behavior builds stronger systems, smarter checks and balances, and governs better. Machiavelli was ahead of his time. Thinkers like Hobbes, who called man a wolf to other men, or Freud, who exposed the unconscious impulses behind our moral masks, would later echo his views. For Machiavelli, politics shouldn't depend on human virtue. It should be built to work even without it. A strong government turns fear, ambition, and vanity into order and stability. How? With clear rules, real consequences, smart incentives, and most of all, a leader who gets the game. A prince who rules based on how people should behave will fail. One who rules based on how people actually behave will lead wisely. And that takes vigilance. The leader needs to understand human behavior and know that people change. A loyal ally can turn into an enemy out of jealousy. A quiet population can explode in anger. Loyalty on the surface might be hiding fear or ambition. Which brings us to another key point. Governing isn't just about laws, it's about reading people. A prince must spot weakness, desire, resentment. He must be able to sense betrayal, avoid emotional traps, and hold power even in a room full of egos. But don't get it wrong. Recognizing selfishness isn't about hating people. It's about respecting reality. It means not expecting too much. It means understanding that politics doesn't turn people into saints. It organizes their interests. And if done right, it can still produce peace, security, and prosperity, even with imperfect citizens. That goes for the people too. Machiavelli knew that the masses are unstable. They might cheer you today and boo you tomorrow. They might feel grateful, but not for long. So he says, don't depend on being loved, just avoid being hated. In other words, you have to manage public emotion, knowing it changes fast. A good leader keeps the appearance of virtue, but deep down, he knows he's dealing with people driven by fear, desire, and ego, not principles. This is one of the biggest keys in Machiavelli's thinking. Ruling means dealing with imperfection and making that your strategy, not your disappointment. The wise leader doesn't get upset by human corruption. He expects it and manages it. How many leaders have fallen because they trusted too much? Thought personal loyalty would last forever? Believed generosity would be paid back with gratitude, only to be betrayed? Machiavelli would say, that wasn't bad luck. It was a bad read on human nature, because even republics, with all their ideas about freedom and equality, are still full of corruptible people. So even the most free governments still need strength and strategy, because human nature doesn't change. A lot of people think freedom and force are opposites. That in republics, built on ideals like participation, justice, and the common good, there's no need for the same level of control, strategy, and hard power as in monarchies or dictatorships. But Machiavelli, always ready to burst idealistic bubbles, says the opposite. Even republics require strength and manipulation. In fact, maybe even more. Machiavelli, who didn't just write The Prince, but also Discourses on Livy, had deep respect for the Roman Republic. He admired its ability to maintain freedom over centuries. But even Rome, in its most virtuous and democratic days, only survived because it knew when to be tough and when to be smart. To him, freedom doesn't survive without force, and republics don't run on noble ideals alone. They require constant vigilance over internal conflict, power struggles, and the endless ambition of citizens. Because let's be honest, human nature doesn't change just because the political system does. The same people who once bowed to a strong prince might later vote in a republic, but they'll still be driven by vanity, fear, ambition, and envy, which means they'll still need to be guided, controlled, and sometimes manipulated. In other words, republics aren't pure spaces. They're battlefields, and if freedom is going to survive, someone has to keep the scales balanced. Machiavelli knew that even in a republic, factions would rise, elites would dominate, and interests would clash. Without a strong strategic center of power, those competing forces would tear each other apart and destroy the very system meant to keep them in check. That's why he believed Republican leaders still need virtù, that mix of boldness, calculation, adaptability, and yes, sometimes deception. They need to know when to use force, when to shape public opinion, when to give in, and when to push back. Yes, even when to deceive. Because even in a free republic, truth isn't always the best strategy. Sometimes people need to believe in a unifying story, a version of events that keeps hope alive, that reinforces justice, that gives people a sense of belonging. And if that story works better than cold facts, then a smart leader goes with the story. This is the heart of Machiavellian politics. Don't govern based on ideals, govern based on reality. And the reality, even under the flag of democracy, is still about power. Look at the modern world. How many so-called free republics are influenced behind the scenes by economic powers, political elites, or invisible lobby groups? How many leaders have to manage alliances, control media narratives, suppress unrest, and watch their opponents, just to maintain a public image of stability? Machiavelli wouldn't be surprised. He'd just call it what it is, the truth without the illusion. And that's what makes him so relevant. He helps us see power as it really works, even when it hides behind noble slogans. That doesn't mean he rejected republics. Quite the opposite. He believed a republic was the best form of government when properly led, when the interests of the elite and the people are balanced, when institutions are strong but flexible, when there's freedom with order, and most of all, when the leaders understand the game and don't fall for idealistic traps. A republic without strength turns to chaos. A republic without cunning gets eaten alive by opportunists. And a republic without leaders who can be both firm and strategic rots from the inside. That's why Machiavelli said that founders or reformers of republics can't be afraid to use tough methods. Sometimes, temporary repression protects long-term freedom. Sometimes, shaping the public narrative prevents civil war. Sometimes, silencing a dangerous faction means peace for everyone else. These are uncomfortable truths. But Machiavelli never cared about making people comfortable. He'd rather be called ruthless than lie to you with empty moralism. So think about it. Have you ever noticed how even the freest countries still rely on control, discipline, and behind-the-scenes power plays? Ever wonder why some republics last and others fall apart from within? Machiavelli would say, the ones that last are the ones that accept the truth about power and act accordingly. If this perspective helped you see politics, even democratic politics, with more clarity, hit the like button, share it with someone who still believes freedom means zero force, and drop a comment. Do you think modern republics are striking the right balance between strategy and liberty? And of course, subscribe to the channel to follow the rest of the series. We're getting close to the end, and the next chapters are key to understanding the core of Machiavellian thinking. Because if even republics require strength and manipulation, then what exactly is this virtue Machiavelli keeps talking about? The real political virtue isn't about being good, it's about being capable. Throughout the history of philosophy, the word virtue has always been tied to high ideals: goodness, justice, honesty, courage, self-control. From Aristotle to Christian thinkers, virtue was the goal of the good person, someone who acts morally, guided by principles. But Machiavelli, true to form, breaks that pattern. He doesn't reject traditional virtue, he just says it doesn't work in real-world politics. Because in the world of power, doing the right thing doesn't always mean success. And failing in the name of morality, to him, isn't virtue. It's weakness. That's why he redefines one of the core ideas of Western ethics. For Machiavelli, virtù, spelled that way in Renaissance Italian, isn't about being moral. It's about being effective. It's the ability to achieve political goals with intelligence, adaptability, boldness, cunning, and firmness. It's the quality of a leader who doesn't wait for the world to be fair, but takes it as it is and acts to control it. This redefinition quietly revolutionizes political thinking. Machiavelli takes one of the most sacred words in Western philosophy, virtue, and turns it into a practical tool focused on results, not abstract ideals. Virtù, for him, is what allows a leader to deal with life's unpredictability. Because the world, in part, is ruled by fortuna, luck, chance, the unexpected. And since no one can fully control fortune, the only way to stand against it is with virtù. In other words, virtù is the inner strength that confronts the outer chaos of luck. It's the art of adapting, acting at the right time, making bold decisions and retreating strategically. It means acting with a cool head and a steady hand, even when everything seems to be falling apart. So for Machiavelli, effective action becomes the core of political ethics. It's not enough to have good intentions, you need results. It's not enough to be just, you need to maintain order. It's not enough to be generous, you need to know when and how to punish. Virtù is the ability to act based on what's necessary, not what sounds noble. That's why a leader with virtù, in the Machiavellian sense, might seem immoral to outsiders. They might make tough decisions, deceive enemies, hide their true motives, or eliminate threats. But if those actions protect the state, ensure security, and preserve legitimate power, then that leader is virtuous. Because to Machiavelli, the failure of a just leader is more dangerous than the success of a tough, effective one. The first may leave the people exposed to chaos. The second, even through hard choices, saves what needs to be saved. This is one of the biggest takeaways from all of Machiavelli's work. Politics runs on actions, not ideals, and true leaders are the ones who understand this deeply. Virtù also demands courage, because acting effectively isn't always easy. Often, it goes against public opinion, against powerful allies, against people's expectations. A leader with virtù does it anyway. They don't chase applause, they chase results that last. And that courage comes from a rare kind of clarity, from knowing that power isn't a contest of purity, it's a test of preparation. Virtù, above all, means being prepared. It also demands emotional control. A leader ruled by anger, vanity, or guilt doesn't act with virtù, they act on impulse. The Machiavellian leader is cold without being cruel, calculating without being cowardly. They act with precision, and they act because it's necessary, not because it feels good. Now think, how many leaders with good intentions have you seen fail? How many had noble values and inspiring speeches, but no strategy, no firmness, no guts? Machiavelli would ask, were they really virtuous, or just idealists who weren't ready? In his view, the answer is clear. Real virtue is effectiveness. Everything else is just appearances. But let's be clear, this isn't a defense of empty cynicism, cruelty for cruelty's sake or lying without purpose. Machiavellian virtù isn't about destruction for power's sake. It's about political action with a clear goal: to keep the state strong, protect people from chaos, and ensure the survival of legitimate power. That's why Machiavelli is still so relevant today. In a world full of nice-sounding speeches that often hide incompetence and idealistic promises that crumble under pressure, he reminds us that leadership requires more than words. It requires effective action. So, what about you? Are you ready to drop the myths around power and see it for what it really is? Are you willing to accept that in politics, the one who looks good isn't always the one who does good, and the one who acts tough isn't always wrong? And now you know, power isn't a fairy tale. It takes a clear understanding of reality, effective action, control of the narrative, and above all, the courage to lead even when it's uncomfortable. Machiavelli isn't inviting you to tyranny. He's inviting you to clarity, to see the world as it is, not as we wish it were, to act with strategy, intelligence, and strength, especially in uncertain times. If this journey through Machiavelli challenged you, made you think like the video, comment below what surprised you the most about his idea of virtù, and share this with someone who still believes good intentions are enough to lead. And of course, subscribe to the channel, because while this may be the last lesson in the series, critical, strategic, and philosophical thinking never ends. In the end, the true leader isn't the one who gets lost in ideals. It's the one who builds with what's actually in front of them. And that, according to Machiavelli, is real virtù. See you on the next journey.